little girl draws the same picture every day. What her teacher found hidden inside shocked everyone. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Mrs. Thompson had been teaching third grade for 15 years. She thought she had seen everything, but nothing prepared her for what she discovered about Lily Chen. Every morning, 8-year-old Lily would arrive at Roosevelt Elementary with the same quiet demeanor. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Her clothes were always neat and pressed. Her backpack was always organized. But there was something in her eyes. Something that made Mrs. Thompson's heart tighten with worry. Lily never smiled. Not really. She would curve her lips upward when adults spoke to her, but the smile never reached her eyes. Her eyes held a sadness that seemed too deep for someone so young. A sadness that made Mrs. Thompson wonder what this little girl had seen in her short life. "Good morning, Lily," Mrs. Thompson would say each day as Lily hung her backpack on its designated hook. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," Lily would reply, her voice barely above a whisper. Always polite, always proper, always so very quiet. The other children would burst through the classroom door with energy and excitement. They would laugh and chatter about their evening adventures. They would show off new toys or share stories about family dinners. They would argue over who got to feed the class hamster or water the plants, but not Lily. Lily would take her seat in the third row, second desk from the window. She would fold her hands neatly on top of her desk. She would sit perfectly still, watching the other children with those sad, knowing eyes. During reading time, while other students stumbled over difficult words or raised their hands with eager questions, Lily would read silently. She was an excellent reader, perhaps the best in the class, but she never volunteered to read aloud, never asked questions, never shared her thoughts about the stories they discussed. "What did you think about the ending of that story, Lily?" Mrs. Thompson would ask gently. "It was good," Lily would respond. Always the same answer. "It was good, Mrs. Thompson." But it was during art time that Lily's behavior became truly concerning. It was during those creative moments that Mrs. Thompson began to see the depth of whatever was troubling this quiet little girl. "Today, we're going to paint spring flowers," Mrs. Thompson announced to her class one Tuesday morning in March. The winter had been long and cold, and everyone was eager for warmer days ahead. "We can paint tulips, daffodils, crocuses, or any spring flower you can imagine." The children cheered and clapped their hands with excitement. Tommy raised his hand eagerly. "Can I paint a whole garden, Mrs. Thompson? With lots of different flowers?" "Of course, sweetheart," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll make sure you get all of your beautiful pictures. They're very important, aren't they?" Lily nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're the only way I could tell anyone. I was too scared to use words, but I could paint the truth." Mrs. Thompson gathered all of Lily's artwork from her desk, handling each painting as if it were made of precious gold. These pictures had been Lily's voice when she couldn't find the courage to speak. They had been her cry for help when she was too frightened to ask directly. As they walked toward the car that would take them to the hospital, Lily looked back at the school building one more time. Roosevelt Elementary had been her safe haven, the place where she felt protected enough to reveal her secret through her art. She had no idea that her courage to paint those pictures had just saved her life. But the hardest part was still to come. Because while Lily was finally safe, her father had no idea that his world was about to come crashing down around him. At exactly 6:17 p.m. that same evening, there was a knock on the door of the small house that Lily had painted so many times. The house with the brown walls and red door. The house that had harbored so many dark secrets under its roof of threatening storm clouds. David Chen had just arrived home from his job at the electronics repair shop where he worked 6 days a week. He was tired, hungry, and already irritated that Lily wasn't there to greet him at the door as she usually did. Where was that girl? Why wasn't dinner ready? Why were the dishes from breakfast still sitting in the sink? His irritation quickly turned to anger as he looked around the empty house. Lily knew better than to not be home when he got back from work. She knew he expected his dinner on the table by 6:30 sharp. She knew he didn't like coming home to a messy house. The girl was going to get a serious lesson about responsibility when she finally showed up. He was already planning what he would say, how he would make sure she understood the consequences of not following his rules. The knock at the door interrupted his angry thoughts. He assumed it was one of the neighbors, maybe Mrs. Henderson from next door, asking to borrow something again. These people had no respect for boundaries. David opened the door with an annoyed expression, ready to tell whoever it was that he didn't have time for their problems. Instead, he found himself face to face with a professionally dressed woman with graying hair and serious eyes. Behind her stood two police officers in full uniform, their expressions stern and official. David's stomach dropped. His mind immediately jumped to the worst possible scenarios. Had something happened to Lily? Had there been an accident? Was she hurt? "Mr. Chen?" the woman asked, her voice calm and professional. "Yes, that's me. What's this about? Is my daughter okay? Has something happened to Lily?" "Mr. Chen, I'm Amanda Patterson from Child Protective Services. These are Officers Martinez and Rodriguez from the City Police Department. We need to talk to you about your daughter Lily." David's face immediately hardened. His defensive instincts kicked in as he realized this wasn't about an accident or emergency. This was about something else entirely, something that could threaten his control over his household. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What have you done with my daughter?" "You have no right to take her anywhere without my permission." "Lily is safe, Mr. Chen," Mrs. Patterson replied calmly. "She's currently being examined by a medical professional to assess her injuries." "Injuries? What injuries?" "Lily is fine. She's just clumsy sometimes. Kids fall down, they bump into things. That's normal." Officer Martinez stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt near his handcuffs. "Mr. Chen, we have documented evidence of multiple injuries on your daughter that are consistent with adult-inflicted physical abuse. We also have testimony from Lily herself describing ongoing violence in this household." David's face turned red with rage. His fists clenched at his sides as he struggled to control his temper in front of the police officers. "That's ridiculous," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of the small house. "Lily is making things up. She's always been a dramatic child, always exaggerating everything. You people have no idea what it's like to raise a child on your own." "Mr. Chen," Mrs. Patterson interrupted, her voice remaining steady despite David's aggressive tone. "We have photographs of bruises on your daughter's body that are in the shape of adult finger marks. We have evidence of belt marks across her arms. We have multiple injuries in various stages of healing. I worked 2 jobs to support that girl," David continued, his voice growing louder and more defensive. "I put food on the table, clothes on her back, a roof over her head. So what if I have to discipline her sometimes? That's my right as her parent. That's my responsibility." Officer Rodriguez stepped closer, his presence clearly making David nervous despite his bluster. "Disciplining a child should never involve physical violence. Mr. Chen, what you've been doing to your daughter isn't discipline. It's abuse. She needs to learn," David shouted, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "She needs to understand that actions have consequences. Her mother spoiled her before she left, filled her head with all kinds of nonsense about feelings and gentleness. Someone has to teach her how the real world works. By terrorizing an 8-year-old child?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal her disgust. "By beating a little girl who weighs less than 60 pounds? I never beat her," David protested, but his words rang hollow even to his own ears. She needs to learn to be respectful. She needs to learn to follow rules. She needs to understand that there are consequences when you don't do what you're supposed to do, like when she spills milk," Officer Martinez asked, consulting his notes. "Or when she doesn't clean up her toys fast enough. Or when she asks too many questions." David's face went pale as he realized just how much information they had. How much Lily must have told them. That ungrateful little girl had betrayed him after everything he had done for her. "She's making things up," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. She's probably just trying to get attention. She's always been jealous of other kids who have their mothers around. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Patterson said, pulling out her phone to show him the photographs of Lily's injuries. Children don't make up injuries like these. Children don't bruise themselves in the shape of adult handprints. David stared at the photos on the phone screen. Seeing his handiwork documented so clinically, so officially, made something twist in his stomach. But he couldn't back down now. He couldn't admit what he had done. Those could be from anything, he said weakly. She plays rough at school. She climbs trees in the neighborhood. Kids get hurt all the time. Belt marks don't come from playing at school, Officer Rodriguez stated flatly. And finger-shaped bruises don't come from climbing trees, Officer Martinez added. David realized that his denials weren't working. These people had evidence. They had testimony. They had photographs. His daughter had told them everything. His anger shifted from defensive to furious. How dare that little girl betray him like this? After everything he had sacrificed for her? After all the times he could have just walked away like her mother did? Fine, he shouted, his face red with rage. Maybe I do have to get physical with her sometimes. Maybe I do have to use force to get her attention. But that's because nothing else works. She's stubborn and defiant and completely disrespectful. The admission hung in the air like a confession. All three professionals stared at David as he essentially confirmed everything they suspected. She ignores me when I try to talk to her, David continued, his voice becoming more desperate as he tried to justify his actions. She doesn't listen to reason. She doesn't respond to normal discipline. Sometimes you have to make children understand that you're serious by terrorizing them. Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice filled with disgust. By teaching them, David screamed. By showing them that actions have consequences. By making sure they understand that the world isn't going to coddle them the way you bleeding hearts want to do. Officer Martinez had heard enough. He pulled out his handcuffs with practiced efficiency. David Chen, you're under arrest for child abuse and endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. No. David struggled against the handcuffs as Officer Martinez secured them around his wrists. You can't do this. She's my daughter. I have rights. I have the right to raise my child the way I see fit. You have the right to raise your child safely and lovingly, Mrs. Patterson replied coldly. You do not have the right to beat and terrorize her. As the police officers led David toward their patrol car, he continued to shout protests and justifications. She needs me. She has nowhere else to go. You're going to destroy her life. You're going to put her in the system where she'll be forgotten and neglected. Mrs. Patterson watched the scene with professional detachment, though her heart ached for the little girl who had endured years of this man's violence. She had seen too many cases like this, too many parents who believed that their anger and frustration justified hurting their children. As the patrol car drove away with David in the back seat, Mrs. Patterson looked up at the small house that Lily had painted so many times, the house that had held so many secrets, so much pain, so much terror. But now the dark clouds were finally beginning to lift. The storm that had raged over this house for years was finally coming to an end. Tomorrow Lily would wake up in a safe place for the first time in longer than she could remember. She would wake up without fear, without having to worry about making too much noise, or spilling her milk, or asking the wrong question. For the first time in her young life, Lily Chen was truly safe. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Thompson walked into Roosevelt Elementary's main office to find a familiar figure sitting in one of the visitor chairs. Lily looked different somehow. Still small, still quiet, but there was something in her posture that hadn't been there before. Something that looked almost like hope. Lily, Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine joy. How wonderful to see you, sweetheart. How are you doing? Lily stood up, and for the first time since Mrs. Thompson had known her, she smiled. Not the practiced, careful smile she used to give to adults, but a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. I'm doing better. Mrs. Thompson, Lily said, her voice stronger and clearer than it had ever been in the classroom. I wanted to come visit and show you something. Mrs. Thompson knelt down to Lily's level, noting that the little girl no longer flinched away from adult attention. She no longer held herself like she was expecting to be hurt at any moment. "I'd love to see whatever you want to show me," Mrs. Thompson said warmly. Lily reached into a small backpack and pulled out a folder filled with artwork. But these paintings were completely different from the ones that had filled Mrs. Thompson with such concern just a few weeks ago. "This is where I live now," Lily said, holding up a painting of a cheerful yellow house with white trim and a bright blue door. "It's Mrs. Foster's house. She's my foster mom." The painting was filled with details that spoke of comfort and safety. Flowers bloomed in the front garden. Curtains hung in the windows. A tire swing hung from a large oak tree in the yard. And most importantly, the sky above the house was bright blue with fluffy white clouds and a smiling sun. "It's beautiful," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tell me about Mrs. Foster. She's really nice," Lily said, her words tumbling out with an enthusiasm Mrs. Thompson had never heard from her before. "She used to be a teacher like you, but now she takes care of kids who need safe places to stay. She has a cat named Whiskers, and she lets me help feed him every morning." Mrs. Thompson studied the painting more closely. In the corner where Lily used to paint small, frightened figures, there was now a different scene. Two figures stood side by side in the garden, both smiling, both the same size, both painted in bright, happy colors. "Is that you and Mrs. Foster?" Mrs. Thompson asked. Lily nodded eagerly. "We planted tomatoes last weekend. Mrs. Foster says I'm a natural gardener because I'm so careful and gentle with the plants." The transformation was remarkable. This was the same little girl who just 3 weeks ago had been too terrified to speak above a whisper. Now she was animated, talkative, even excited to share her experiences. "I brought you something else," Lily said, reaching back into her folder. She pulled out another painting, this one showing Roosevelt Elementary School. "I painted our classroom." The painting showed Mrs. Thompson's third-grade classroom in loving detail. The reading corner with its colorful beanbags. The science table with its collection of rocks and shells. The art station, where Lily had created her desperate cries for help, but in this painting, the classroom was filled with light. Sunshine streamed through the windows. Children sat at their desks with happy faces, and at the teacher's desk sat Mrs. Thompson, painted with a warm smile and kind eyes. "This is how I remember our classroom," Lily explained. "Even when I was scared at home, I always felt safe here. I felt like you cared about me, even when I couldn't tell you what was wrong." Mrs. Thompson felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I did care about you, Lily. I cared so much. I just wish I had understood sooner what you were trying to tell me with your paintings." "You understood when it mattered," Lily said with surprising wisdom for someone so young. "Mrs. Foster says sometimes it takes time for grown-ups to understand what children are trying to say. But the important thing is that they don't give up trying to listen." Mrs. Foster appeared in the doorway of the office at that moment. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She wore comfortable clothes and moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent decades working with children. "I hope we're not interrupting," Mrs. Foster said warmly. "Lily has been talking about visiting her favorite teacher all week." "Not at all," Mrs. Thompson said, standing to shake Mrs. Foster's hand. "It's wonderful to meet you. Lily seems so happy and healthy." "She's a remarkable little girl," Mrs. Foster replied, placing a protective but gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "She's been through so much, but she's incredibly resilient. She's already made friends with 2 other children in the neighborhood, and she's starting at a new school next week." "I'm a little nervous about the new school," Lily admitted. "But Mrs. Foster says all the teachers there are nice, and she's going to come with me on the first day." "You'll do wonderfully," Mrs. Thompson assured her. "And remember, if you ever need anything, you can always call me or visit here. This will always be a safe place for you." Lily nodded, then reached into her folder one more time. "I have one more painting to show you. This one is special." The final painting took Mrs. Thompson's breath away. It showed a small girl with dark hair standing in a bright, sunny field. The girl's arms were spread wide, her face turned up toward the sky, and she was surrounded by butterflies in every color imaginable. At the bottom of the painting, in Lily's careful handwriting, were the words, "Free to fly? This is me now," Lily explained quietly. "Mrs. Foster helped me understand that I don't have to be afraid anymore. I don't have to make myself small and quiet. I can be as big and loud and happy as I want to be." Mrs. Thompson could barely speak through her tears. "It's the most beautiful painting I've ever seen, Lily. I want you to keep it," Lily said, holding the painting out to her former teacher. "To remember that sometimes children who can't use words can still tell their stories. And sometimes teachers who pay attention can save lives." As Mrs. Thompson accepted the painting, she made a silent promise to herself. She would never again ignore the signs when a child was trying to communicate through their artwork. She would never again dismiss repetitive drawings as just a phase or a quirk. She had learned that children's art could be their voice when they had no other way to speak. And listening to that voice, really listening, could mean the difference between continued suffering and salvation. "Thank you, Lily," Mrs. Thompson whispered. "Thank you for being brave enough to paint the truth." "Thank you for being smart enough to understand it," Lily replied. As Lily and Mrs. Foster prepared to leave, Mrs. Foster turned back to Mrs. Thompson. "I want you to know that Lily talks about you all the time," she said. "You were the first adult who made her feel truly safe. That's a gift that will stay with her for the rest of her life." Mrs. Thompson watched through the office window as Lily skipped toward Mrs. Foster's car, her step light and carefree in a way it had never been when she was in Mrs. Thompson's classroom. The little girl who had once painted nothing but dark, clouds, and threatening storms was now free to paint sunshine and butterflies and all the beautiful possibilities that lay ahead in her new life. 6 months after that first concerning painting had caught Mrs. Thompson's attention, she found herself sitting in a courthouse waiting room, prepared to testify in David Chen's trial. The legal proceedings had been slow and complex, but finally justice was about to be served. Lily sat beside her, no longer the terrified, silent child she had been. In the months since being placed with Mrs. Foster, Lily had blossomed in ways that amazed everyone who knew her story. She was still quiet by nature, but it was now the peaceful quiet of someone who felt safe, not the fearful silence of someone living in terror. "Are you nervous about testifying today?" Mrs. Thompson asked gently. Lily considered the question seriously. "A little," she admitted. "But Mrs. Foster says that telling the truth is always the right thing to do, even when it's scary." The transformation in Lily's life had been remarkable to witness. She was excelling at her new school, had made several close friends, and had even joined the school art club where her talent was celebrated and encouraged. Her paintings now reflected the joy and security she felt in her new life. Mrs. Foster, who'd been sitting quietly nearby, leaned over to join their conversation. "The prosecutor says this should be fairly straightforward," she explained to Mrs. Thompson. "David's defense attorney has been trying to argue that his actions constituted normal parental discipline, but the evidence is overwhelming. Indeed, the evidence against David Chen was substantial. The photographs of Lily's injuries, her own testimony about years of abuse, the psychological evaluation that documented the trauma she had endured, and perhaps most powerfully, the series of paintings that told the story of a little girl's silent cries for help. Mrs. Thompson had brought copies of all of Lily's artwork from the months leading up to her disclosure. The progression from normal childhood drawings to the repetitive, desperate images of the brown house under dark clouds told a story more compelling than any words could express. When they were called into the courtroom, Mrs. Thompson was struck by how small and defeated David Chen looked sitting at the defendant's table. Gone was the angry, aggressive man who had shouted justifications and threats on the day of his arrest. In his place sat someone who seemed to have finally grasped the magnitude of what he had done to his daughter. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Williams, presented the case with clinical precision. She walked the jury through the timeline of abuse, the documentation of injuries, and the psychological impact on Lily. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Miss Williams said in her closing argument, "this case is about more than just physical abuse. This is about a man who systematically terrorized his own child for years, who made an 8-year-old girl believe that she deserved to be hurt, who convinced her that reporting his violence would leave her. Abandoned and alone, she held up one of Lily's paintings, the brown house with its threatening storm clouds. This little girl was so afraid to speak the truth that she could only communicate her pain through art. Day after day, week after week, she painted the same image. Her home, covered by dark clouds of fear and violence, and in the corners of these paintings, barely visible, she drew herself as a tiny figure cowering before a much larger, threatening presence. The jury studied the painting with obvious emotion. Several jurors wiped tears from their eyes as they absorbed the visual representation of a child's terror. "But this story doesn't end with those dark paintings," Ms. Williams continued, holding up Lily's more recent artwork. "Because caring adults recognized her silent cry for help. Because teachers and counselors and social workers did their jobs and protected this child. Today, Lily Chen is safe. She is thriving. She's finally free to be the happy, creative, brilliant little girl she was always meant to be." When it came time for Lily to testify, she walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity. She had grown several inches in the past 6 months, and her face had filled out from proper nutrition and the absence of constant stress. But most remarkably, she carried herself with a confidence that would have been unimaginable during her days of silent suffering. The prosecutor's questions were gentle and age-appropriate, designed to let Lily tell her story without re-traumatizing her. "Lily, can you tell us about the paintings you made at school?" "I painted my house a lot," Lily said, her voice clear and steady. "I painted it with dark clouds because that's how it felt to live there, like there was always a storm coming." "Why did you paint the same picture so many times?" "Because I wanted someone to understand how scared I was, but I didn't know how to say it with words. I thought if I painted it enough times, maybe someone would see that I needed help." "Are you still scared now?" Lily looked over at Mrs. Foster, who gave her an encouraging smile. "No," Lily said firmly. "I'm not scared anymore. I live with Mrs. Foster now, and she takes good care of me. She never hurts me, and she tells me that no one should ever hurt children." David Chen's defense attorney tried to present a case based on his client's difficult circumstances. Raising a child alone, working multiple jobs, dealing with stress and financial pressure. But the evidence of systematic abuse was too overwhelming to dismiss or justify. When David was given the opportunity to address the court, he stood slowly and looked directly at his daughter for the first time since the trial began. "Lily," he said, his voice breaking, "I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for scaring you. I'm sorry for making you feel like you deserve to be treated that way." Lily listened to her father's words with the same serious attention she gave to everything else. When he finished speaking, she nodded slightly, not with forgiveness, but with acknowledgement. The judge, a stern-faced woman with decades of experience in family court, delivered David's sentence with appropriate gravity. "Mr. Chen, you have been found guilty of multiple counts of child abuse and endangerment. You will serve 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will complete anger management counseling and parenting classes. Any future contact with your daughter will be contingent upon court approval and her own wishes as she gets older." As David was led away in handcuffs, Lily watched without emotion. Mrs. Foster had helped her understand that it was okay to love her father and still be glad that he couldn't hurt her anymore. Outside the courthouse, as they walked toward Mrs. Foster's car, Lily suddenly stopped and looked up at the sky. It was a beautiful spring day, with puffy white clouds drifting lazily across a brilliant blue backdrop. "Look," she said, pointing upward. No dark clouds today, Mrs. Thompson smiled, understanding the deeper meaning of Lily's observation. No dark clouds, she agreed. Just sunshine and beautiful possibilities ahead. 6 months later, Mrs. Thompson received another letter from Lily, along with a package wrapped in bright yellow paper. Dear Mrs. Thompson, I hope you're having a great school year with your new students. Mrs. Foster and I are doing wonderful. I made honor roll again this semester and I won second place in the school art contest. I'm sending you a new painting I made. It's of you in your classroom, but this time I painted myself there too, sitting at my old desk. I painted both of us smiling because even though those days were scary for me, I always felt safe when I was with you. Mrs. Foster says I can visit you again soon if you'd like. I'd love to meet your new students and maybe tell them about how art can help us express our feelings when words aren't enough. Thank you for saving my life by paying attention to my paintings. Thank you for caring enough to ask questions when something didn't seem right. Thank you for helping me find my voice when I thought I had lost it forever. Love always. Lily P.S. I still paint houses sometimes, but now they all have sunshine and flowers and families laughing in the gardens. Mrs. Thompson unwrapped the package to find a painting that took her breath away. It showed her third-grade classroom exactly as Lily remembered it. But in this version, both teacher and student were surrounded by a warm, golden light that seemed to emanate from their connection to each other. At the bottom of the painting, in Lily's now confident handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for listening to my pictures." Mrs. Thompson hung the painting on the wall behind her desk, where it would remind her every day of the power of paying attention, of the importance of really seeing the children in her care, not just their academic performance or their behavior, but their hearts and their hidden struggles. 2 years after Lily's rescue, Mrs. Thompson stood before a room full of teachers at Roosevelt Elementary's professional development workshop. The topic was recognizing signs of abuse through student artwork, and Mrs. Thompson had been asked to share Lily's story as an example of how art can serve as a child's voice when they cannot speak. Children who are experiencing trauma often express their pain through creative outlets. Mrs. Thompson explained to her colleagues, they may not have the vocabulary to describe what's happening to them, or they may be too frightened to speak directly about their situation, but their artwork can tell us everything we need to know if we learn how to read the signs. She displayed several examples of Lily's paintings on the screen behind her, the progression, from normal childhood drawings to the repetitive, desperate images of the house under dark clouds. The key indicators I want you to watch for are repetition, dark themes and symbols that seem out of place in a child's typical artistic expression. When a child draws or paints the same disturbing image over and over again, they're trying to tell us something important. Sarah Martinez, a first-year teacher, raised her hand. But how do you know when to be concerned versus when it's just a phase? My nephew went through a period where he only wanted to draw dinosaurs eating people. Mrs. Thompson smiled. That's a great question, Sarah. The difference is in the emotional content and the context. Dinosaurs eating people might be dramatic, but it's also age-appropriate fantasy play. What concerned me about Lily's artwork was the consistent darkness, the repeated imagery of threat and fear, and the way she reacted when asked about her drawings. She clicked to the next slide, showing close-up images of the tiny figures Lily had hidden in the corners of her paintings. These details were barely visible unless you looked carefully. The small figure representing herself was always positioned defensively. The larger figure was always threatening. These weren't random elements. They were specific communications about her home environment. Mrs. Thompson went on to explain the importance of documentation, of taking concerns seriously even when they seemed minor, and of following proper protocols when abuse was suspected. The most important thing I learned from Lily's case, she concluded, is that we must trust our instincts. If something feels wrong, if a child's behavior or artwork or demeanor raises red flags, we have an obligation to investigate further. We cannot let our fear of being wrong prevent us from potentially saving a life. After the workshop, several teachers approached Mrs. Thompson with their own concerns about students. She was able to provide guidance and support, helping them understand when and how to report suspected abuse. One teacher, Mrs. Garcia, from the kindergarten class, showed Mrs. Thompson a series of drawings by a 5-year-old student named Marcus. He's been drawing these same figures over and over, Mrs. Garcia explained. A big person with red scribbles around their head and a small person hiding under what looks like a table or bed. Mrs. Thompson studied the drawings carefully. The parallels to Lily's artwork were unmistakable. "Have you noticed any other concerning behaviors?" she asked. "He's very withdrawn, won't participate in group activities, and he flinches whenever adults raise their voices. Even in normal conversation. You need to report this today," Mrs. Thompson said firmly. "Don't wait, don't second-guess yourself. This child is communicating through his artwork just like Lily did." Mrs. Garcia nodded, her expression determined. "I'll call Ms. Rodriguez as soon as I get back to my classroom." 6 months later, Mrs. Thompson learned that Marcus had also been removed from an abusive situation and placed in protective care. His drawings, like Lily's paintings, had been the key to uncovering years of hidden suffering. The impact of Lily's story continued to ripple outward. Mrs. Thompson began speaking at conferences and training sessions across the state, teaching educators how to recognize the signs of abuse in student artwork. Her presentations always included Lily's paintings as examples. With Lily's permission and support, Lily herself, now 11 years old and thriving in her new life with Mrs. Foster, sometimes accompanied Mrs. Thompson to these presentations. She would share her story with remarkable poise and maturity, explaining how art had been her lifeline during the darkest period of her childhood. "I couldn't use words to ask for help," Lily would tell audiences of teachers and social workers, "but I could paint the truth. When grown-ups learned how to read my pictures, they were able to save my life." Mrs. Foster had adopted Lily 2 years after her initial placement, making their family relationship permanent. Lily excelled in school, maintained close friendships, and continued to express herself through art. But now her paintings were filled with light, joy, and hope. Her relationship with her biological father remained complicated. David had completed his sentence and mandatory counseling programs and had requested supervised visits with his daughter. After careful consideration and extensive therapy, Lily had agreed to limited contact. Their relationship was slowly, cautiously rebuilding, with strict oversight and Lily's well-being as the top priority. "I forgive him," Lily explained to Mrs. Thompson during one of their regular visits. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means I don't want to carry anger around with me anymore." Her wisdom and resilience continued to amaze everyone who knew her story. The brown house from Lily's paintings still stood on Maple Street, but it had been sold to a new family, a young couple with twin toddlers who filled the yard with laughter and the windows with warm light. The dark clouds that had once seemed permanently fixed above that address had finally moved on. Replaced by blue skies and sunshine, Mrs. Thompson drove by the house occasionally, always thinking of the little girl who had lived there in fear for so many years. But now, instead of sadness, she felt hope when she looked at that red door and those square windows. The house had been transformed from a place of suffering into a home filled with love and safety. Lily's story had taught her that healing was possible, that children were incredibly resilient when given the chance to flourish in safe environments. That art could indeed save lives when caring adults learned how to listen to its silent messages. Most importantly, Lily's story had reinforced the fundamental truth that every child deserves to be protected, loved, and given the opportunity to express themselves without fear. In her classroom, Mrs. Thompson now paid even closer attention to her students' artwork. She looked for patterns, for hidden messages, for silent cries for help that might be embedded in seemingly innocent drawings. She had learned that sometimes the most important conversations happen without words. Sometimes the most urgent communications come through paintbrush strokes and crayon marks. Sometimes saving a life is as simple as really seeing what a child is trying to show you. And she had learned that when we pay attention, truly pay attention, to the children in our care, we give them the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that their voices matter, their feelings are valid, and their safety is worth fighting for. Every child deserves to paint sunshine instead of storm clouds. Every child deserves to feel safe enough to express themselves freely. Every child deserves adults who will listen to their pictures when their words aren't enough. That is the lesson Lily Chen taught through her. And that is the legacy of a little girl who was brave enough to paint the truth, and the caring adults who were wise enough to understand what her pictures were trying to say. Today, Lily's paintings hang in Mrs. Foster's home like windows into a transformed life. Where once there were dark clouds and threatening storms, now there are rainbows and butterflies, flowers and sunshine. Families holding hands and children playing freely in gardens full of hope. The silence has been broken. The secrets have been revealed. The healing has begun. And somewhere in a bright, safe classroom, another teacher is looking carefully at a student's artwork, wondering what story those pictures might be trying to tell. Because of Lily's courage and Mrs. Thompson's attention, that teacher now knows to listen with her eyes, to hear with her heart, and to act when a child's art whispers the truth they cannot speak aloud. That is how one little girl's paintings changed the world, one rescued child at a time. You can, Tommy, use your imagination. Sarah bounced in her seat. I'm going to paint the biggest, most beautiful rose in the whole world. That sounds wonderful, Sarah. The children rushed to the art station, chattering excitedly about their plans. Brushes clattered against water jars. Paint squeezed from tubes in bright, cheerful colors. Yellow for daffodils, pink for tulips, purple for crocuses. But Lily walked slowly to the art station. Her footsteps were quiet and deliberate. She picked up her brush with careful fingers, as if it were made of the most delicate glass. While the other kids mixed bright spring colors on their palettes, Lily reached for brown paint, dark, muddy brown. Mrs. Thompson watched from across the room as Lily began to paint. Not flowers, not spring scenes, not anything that resembled the assignment she had given to the class. A house. Lily was painting a house. The same house she had drawn and painted every single day for the past 3 weeks. Mrs. Thompson's chest tightened with concern. She had been teaching long enough to recognize when a child's artwork was trying to communicate something important. Art was often the way children expressed feelings they couldn't put into words. And Lily's artwork was definitely trying to say something. The house Lily painted was always exactly the same. A small brown structure with a red door. 2 windows on the front, both drawn as perfect squares. A chimney on the right side of the roof. A pathway leading to the front door. But there was something else in Lily's painting that made Mrs. Thompson's heart sink. Something that the other children's bright, cheerful artwork never contained. Something that seemed to cast a shadow over the entire picture. Dark clouds. Always dark, angry-looking clouds covering the entire sky above the little house. Clouds that looked ready to unleash a terrible storm. Clouds that seemed to press down on the small house like a heavy weight. Mrs. Thompson had seen these paintings develop over the past 3 weeks. Day after day, the same image. The same brown house. The same red door. The same dark, threatening sky. At first, she had thought it was just a phase. Children sometimes became fixated on particular subjects. Tommy had gone through a dinosaur phase where he drew nothing but T-Rexes for 2 months. Sarah had a princess phase where every picture featured a girl in a flowing gown and tiara. But this felt different. There was something urgent about Lily's repetitive artwork. Something desperate. That's a lovely house, Lily, Mrs. Thompson said, kneeling beside her student. She kept her voice gentle and non-threatening. Can you tell me about it? Lily's small hands gripped the paintbrush tighter. Her knuckles turned white against the purple handle. Mrs. Thompson noticed how Lily's shoulders tensed when she spoke, how her breathing became shallow and quick. It's just a house, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible even though Mrs. Thompson was right beside her. Nothing special, Just a regular house, but it wasn't just a regular house. Mrs. Thompson could see that clearly. There was something about the way Lily painted it. Something about the careful attention to every detail. Something about the way she always included those dark, threatening clouds. Does someone live in that house? Mrs. Thompson asked, her voice remaining soft and encouraging. Lily's paintbrush began to tremble in her small hand. A single tear rolled down her pale cheek, but she quickly wiped it away with the back of her free hand. "I don't want to talk about it," Lily said, her voice cracking slightly. "Please, Mrs. Thompson, I don't want to talk about it." The pain in Lily's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just a child being shy or stubborn. This was a child who was genuinely distressed, a child who was carrying a burden far too heavy for her small shoulders. "Okay, sweetheart," Mrs. Thompson said gently. "We don't have to talk about it right now. But I want you to know that if you ever do want to talk, I'm here to listen." Lily nodded slightly, but didn't look up from her painting. She continued adding details to the house. A doorknob on the red door, window frames around the square windows, shingles on the roof. Around them, the other children continued their spring flower paintings. They laughed and chatted as they worked. They held up their artwork to show their friends. They asked for help mixing colors or reaching supplies, but Lily painted in silence. Her focus was intense, as if this painting held all of her secrets. As if getting every detail exactly right was the most important thing in the world. The bell rang for recess, its sharp sound cutting through the comfortable noise of the classroom. Children immediately began cleaning their brushes and putting away supplies. They talked excitedly about what they would do on the playground. "Can we play kickball today?" "I call first base." "Let's use the swings." They rushed toward the door, eager to burn off energy in the fresh spring air, but Lily remained seated at the art table, staring at her painting with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. She didn't move to clean her brush. She didn't put away her paints. She just sat there, looking at the small brown house under its canopy of dark clouds. "Lily," Mrs. Thompson said gently, "it's time for recess. Would you like to go play with the other children?" Lily looked up, her eyes filled with a weariness that broke Mrs. Thompson's heart. "Can I stay here?" she asked quietly. "I don't really feel like playing today." Mrs. Thompson knelt down beside Lily's chair. She wanted to reach out and hug this sad little girl, but something in Lily's posture warned her to keep her distance. Lily held herself so carefully, as if she were afraid of being touched. "Are you feeling okay, sweetheart? Do you have a stomach ache? A headache?" Lily shook her head slowly. "I'm fine, Mrs. Thompson. I just like to sit quietly sometimes." But she wasn't fine. Mrs. Thompson could see that clearly. This little girl was carrying some kind of pain or fear that she couldn't express in words. So she expressed it in paint instead, over and over again. The same house, the same dark sky, the same silent cry for help. "All right," Mrs. Thompson said. "You can stay here with me. But let's clean up your art supplies first, okay?" Together, they washed Lily's paintbrush until the water ran clear. They put the caps back on the paint tubes. They wiped down the table with paper towels. As they worked, Mrs. Thompson studied Lily's latest painting. Like all the others, it was meticulously detailed. Every line was precise. Every color was carefully chosen. This wasn't random artwork. This was purposeful communication. The question was, what was Lily trying to say? Mrs. Thompson's instincts told her something was very wrong in this little girl's life. But she had no idea just how wrong things really were. She had no idea that those dark clouds in Lily's paintings represented real storms, real danger, real fear. She had no idea that this quiet, polite little girl was living a nightmare that most people couldn't even imagine. During lunch break, while the children ate their sandwiches and played on the playground, Mrs. Thompson found herself unable to concentrate on anything except Lily's artwork. Something about those repetitive paintings nagged at her consciousness. Her teacher instincts were screaming that this child needed help, but she couldn't quite put her finger on why. She decided to take a closer look at all of Lily's previous artwork. She walked to the large filing cabinet where she kept folders for each student's projects throughout the school year. Each folder contained drawings, paintings, writing assignments, and other creative work that the children had completed since September. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out the folder labeled Chen Lily in her neat handwriting. She spread the contents across her desk, arranging them in chronological order from oldest to most recent. What she saw made her stomach drop. September's artwork had been different. Lily had drawn typical things that most third graders drew: a family portrait with stick figures holding hands, a cat sitting in a sunny window, a tree with autumn leaves falling to the ground. October had shown some changes. The drawings became more detailed, more carefully rendered, but they were still normal childhood subjects. A Halloween pumpkin, a turkey for Thanksgiving, a winter snowman. But then came December. That's when the house first appeared. Mrs. Thompson examined the December paintings more closely. The first house drawing was simpler than the recent ones. Just a basic rectangle with a triangle roof, a door, 2 windows. But even in that first drawing, there were dark scribbles across the top of the page where the sky should be. January's artwork showed the house becoming more detailed. The door was now colored red. The windows had frames. A chimney appeared on the roof. February brought more refinements. A pathway to the door, shingles on the roof, a doorknob. And March, every single piece of artwork was the same house, over and over again. Each one more detailed than the last, each one with darker, more threatening clouds overhead. But as Mrs. Thompson examined the paintings more closely, she noticed details she had missed before. Details that made her heart race with alarm. In the corner of each recent painting, barely visible unless you knew to look for them, were tiny figures. Mrs. Thompson squinted at the small shapes, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She pulled out the magnifying glass she kept in her desk drawer for examining students' work. What she saw through the magnifier made her blood run cold. A small girl with black hair, drawn in thin, careful lines. The girl was always positioned near the house, sometimes by the red door, sometimes by one of the windows, and towering over the small girl was another figure. A much larger figure with broad shoulders and long arms. Mrs. Thompson's hands trembled as she adjusted the magnifying glass to get a better look. The larger figure's face was always colored in with angry red strokes. Its mouth was drawn as a harsh black line. Its eyes were dark, empty circles, but it was the hands of the larger figure that made Mrs. Thompson's chest tighten with dread. The hands were always drawn raised above its head, as if ready to strike. In some paintings, dark lines seemed to radiate from the hands toward the small girl below. These weren't just random drawings. These were scenes, stories told in paint and crayon. Stories of a small girl and a large, angry figure who loomed over her with raised hands. Mrs. Thompson felt sick. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and took photographs of each painting, making sure to capture the tiny figures in the corners that told such a horrifying story. She needed help processing what she was seeing. She needed another professional opinion. She needed to know if she was reading too much into a child's artwork or if her worst fears were justified. She gathered up all of Lily's paintings and walked quickly across the hall to the school counselor's office. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as children's laughter drifted in from the playground outside. "Sarah!" she called as she knocked on the counselor's door. "Are you in there? I need you to look at something urgent." Miss Rodriguez, the school counselor, opened her door with a concerned expression. She was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had been working with children for over 20 years and had developed an intuition for recognizing when something was seriously wrong. "What is it, Jennifer? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I might have," Mrs. Thompson replied, her voice shaky. "I need you to look at these paintings. Tell me what you see." Ms. Rodriguez gestured for Mrs. Thompson to enter her office. The room was decorated with calming colors and filled with comfortable chairs, books, and games designed to help children feel safe and supported. Mrs. Thompson spread Lily's paintings across Ms. Rodriguez's desk, arranging them in chronological order so the progression was clear. Ms. Rodriguez studied the images carefully. Her expression grew more serious with each painting. "How long has she been drawing these?" Ms. Rodriguez asked, her voice tight with professional concern. "The house first appeared in December. But look at the progression. They're getting more detailed, more specific. And look at this." Mrs. Thompson pointed to the tiny figures in the corners of the recent paintings. Ms. Rodriguez pulled out her own magnifying glass and examined the small drawings more closely. She studied each figure carefully, noting the positioning, the colors, the repeated themes. "These are concerning," Ms. Rodriguez said quietly. "Very concerning. The repetitive nature, the dark imagery, the figures in the corners. This child is trying to tell us something." "That's what I thought too," Mrs. Thompson said. "But I wanted another opinion before I jumped to any conclusions." Ms. Rodriguez picked up one of the most recent paintings and held it up to the light. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the small girl figure. "See how she's positioned? She's always smaller than she should be in proportion to the house. And she's always alone, except for this larger figure. The larger figure with the raised hands," Mrs. Thompson added grimly. "Exactly. And in every single painting, that figure is colored with angry red. The body language suggests aggression or violence." Ms. Rodriguez set down the painting and looked directly at Mrs. Thompson. "We need to talk to Lily today." "This cannot wait," Mrs. Thompson nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "I was hoping you would say that, but I'm also terrified of what we might discover." "I know," Ms. Rodriguez said gently, "but that little girl has been trying to tell us something for months. We owe it to her to listen." They decided to wait until after lunch. When the children returned from recess, Ms. Rodriguez would conduct the interview in her office, with Mrs. Thompson present for support since Lily trusted her teacher. When the lunch bell rang and the children filed back into the classroom, chattering about their playground adventures, Mrs. Thompson found herself watching Lily with new eyes. She noticed how the little girl walked slowly, as if every step required careful consideration. She noticed how Lily kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the other children. She noticed how Lily's hands trembled slightly as she took out her afternoon textbooks. "Lily," Mrs. Thompson said gently as the other children settled into their seats. "Ms. Rodriguez would like to talk with you for a few minutes. You're not in trouble. She just wants to chat about your beautiful artwork." Lily's face went pale. Her dark eyes filled with fear. "Am I in trouble?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. You haven't done anything wrong at all. Ms. Rodriguez just likes to talk with students sometimes. She's very nice, and I'll be there with you the whole time." But as they walked toward Ms. Rodriguez's office, Mrs. Thompson noticed something that made her blood run cold. Something she had somehow missed before, despite watching Lily carefully for weeks. Lily was limping. It was subtle, barely noticeable, unless you knew to look for it. But there was definitely a slight hesitation in her right leg. A careful way of placing her foot that suggested pain or injury. Mrs. Thompson's throat tightened. She felt like she might be sick. How had she missed this? How long had this little girl been hurt and hiding it? As they reached Ms. Rodriguez's office, Mrs. Thompson noticed something else. When Lily raised her arm to push open the office door, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing what looked like a dark bruise on her pale skin. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was absolutely terrifying. In Ms. Rodriguez's office, Lily sat in a soft blue chair that seemed to swallow her small frame. Her feet dangled several inches above the floor, making her look even younger and more vulnerable than her 8 years. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, the same careful posture she maintained in the classroom. Ms. Rodriguez pulled her own chair close to Lily's, but not so close as to make the child feel trapped or overwhelmed. She had learned over the years that traumatized children needed space and control, even in safe environments. "Lily, I want you to know that this is a safe place," Ms. Rodriguez began, her voice warm and reassuring. "Nothing you say here will get you in trouble. I'm here to help, not to judge or punish. Do you understand? Lily nodded slightly, but her eyes remained fixed on her hands. Mrs. Thompson could see the child's shoulders tensing with each passing moment. Your teacher, Mrs. Thompson, showed me some of your artwork. Ms. Rodriguez continued. You're quite an artist. I'd love to hear about the house you've been painting. Lily's eyes filled with tears that she tried desperately to hold back. She looked toward the door, as if calculating whether she could make an escape. It's just a house, she repeated, the same words she had told Mrs. Thompson countless times. But now her voice carried a note of desperation. Nothing special. Just a regular house that I like to draw. Sometimes when we draw or paint the same thing many times, it means something very important to us, Ms. Rodriguez said gently. Is this house important to you, Lily? Lily's lower lip began to tremble. She squeezed her hands together so tightly that Mrs. Thompson could see her knuckles turning white beneath her pale skin. It's my house, she finally whispered, the words coming out as barely a breath. And who lives in your house with you? Ms. Rodriguez asked, leaning forward slightly. My daddy and me. Lily's voice was so quiet that both women had to strain to hear her. Mommy went away when I was little. Daddy says she didn't want us anymore. Mrs. Thompson and Ms. Rodriguez exchanged glances. They both noticed how Lily's entire body seemed to shrink when she mentioned her father. How her voice dropped to almost nothing. How her breathing became shallow and quick. What do you like to do at home with your daddy? Ms. Rodriguez asked. Keeping her tone light and conversational, Lily was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her words cut straight through both women's hearts. I try to be very quiet, she said, her voice filled with the weariness that no child should ever have to carry. Daddy works very hard and he gets tired. He gets mad when I make noise. He says I'm too loud. He says I need to learn to be a good girl and not bother him. What happens when your daddy gets mad? Ms. Rodriguez asked, her professional training helping her maintain a calm demeanor despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. Lily looked up for the first time since entering the office. Her dark eyes were filled with fear, but also with something else. Something that looked almost like relief, as if she'd been waiting for someone to ask this question for a very long time. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her right sleeve. The movement was deliberate and painful, and Mrs. Thompson realized why Lily had been favoring that arm. What they saw made both women gasp involuntarily. A bruise in the perfect shape of adult fingers wrapped around Lily's thin upper arm. The bruise was dark purple and yellow, indicating it was several days old. But it was clearly defined, unmistakably, the mark left by someone gripping a child's arm with tremendous force. He helps me remember to be quiet, Lily said, as if this was the most normal explanation in the world. When I forget and make too much noise, he helps me remember. Mrs. Thompson felt like she might vomit. Her hands shook as she reached for the tissues on Ms. Rodriguez's desk, not for herself, but anticipating that Lily might need them. Lily, Ms. Rodriguez said, her voice steady despite the horror she was feeling. Does your daddy hurt you in other ways, too? Lily nodded slowly. Sometimes I don't do things right. Sometimes I spill milk or drop things. Sometimes I forget to clean up my toys fast enough. She paused, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Daddy says it's important for me to learn. He says all parents have to teach their children how to behave. Can you show us where else your daddy hurts you? Ms. Rodriguez asked gently. With the same careful, deliberate movements, Lily lifted her shirt slightly to reveal her ribs. Dark bruises covered her small torso, some old and fading yellow, others fresh and purple-black. Mrs. Thompson couldn't help the small cry that escaped her lips. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to maintain some semblance of composure for Lily's sake. And sometimes, Lily continued, rolling up her left sleeve, when I don't eat all my dinner or when I ask too many questions. She revealed more finger-shaped bruises on her other arm, and what looked like the mark from a belt across her forearm. The room fell silent except for the sound of Lily's quiet sniffling and the tick of the wall, clock that seemed unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. Lily, Ms. Rodriguez said, her voice barely above a whisper, I need to tell you something very important. Are you ready to listen? Lily nodded, though her whole body was trembling now. Good parents never hurt their children, never, not even when they're teaching them or when they're tired or when they're upset. What your daddy is doing to you is not okay. It's not normal. It's not your fault. And it needs to stop. Lily's eyes widened in confusion and terror. But Daddy says all parents do this. He says it's normal. He says I need to learn to be good. Your daddy is wrong, Ms. Rodriguez said firmly but gently. Good parents use words to teach their children. They might give timeouts or take away privileges, but they never, ever use their hands or belts or anything else to hurt their children. Lily began to cry in earnest now, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her tiny frame. But if I tell someone, Daddy said they'll take me away, she cried. He said they'll put me in a place with strangers who don't know me. He said no one else wants a bad little girl like me. He said if I ever told anyone our family business, I'd have nowhere to go. The manipulation was clear to both professionals. The psychological damage was evident. This little girl had been living in terror, believing not only that she deserved the abuse, but that reporting it would leave her completely alone in the world. Lily, sweetheart, Mrs. Thompson said, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the office. You are not a bad little girl. You are a wonderful, smart, kind little girl who deserves to be safe and loved. Your daddy told you those things because he was scared that someone would find out he was hurting you. But he was wrong about everything. There are people whose job it is to keep children safe, Miss Rodriguez added. And there are families who would love to take care of a little girl like you if your daddy can't learn to stop hurting you. Lily looked back and forth between the two women, as if trying to decide whether she could trust them with the truth. Are you going to call those people? She asked, her voice filled with terror. Ms. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Yes, Lily, I have to call them. It's my job to keep children safe, and you are not safe at home right now. Lily's sobs became louder, more desperate. No, please don't. He'll be so angry. He'll hurt me worse. Please, I'll be better. I'll be quieter. I'll do everything right. Mrs. Thompson knelt down beside Lily's chair, careful not to touch her, but close enough to offer comfort through her presence. Sweetheart, listen to me. You haven't done anything wrong. You are not the one who needs to be better. Your daddy is the one who needs to change. And we're going to make sure you're safe while that happens. But Lily was beyond consolation. The fear that had been building inside her for months, maybe years, was finally pouring out. She cried for the childhood she had lost. She cried for the terror she lived with every day. She cried for the love she had never received from the one person who should have protected her above all else. Ms. Rodriguez knew they had reached the point of no return. This child was in immediate danger, and they had a legal and moral obligation to act. But her heart broke for this little girl who was so terrified of the very help that could save her life. The next phone call would change everything. For Lily, for her father, for everyone involved in this tragic situation. But it was a call that had to be made. Ms. Rodriguez reached for her phone with hands that trembled despite her years of professional experience. She had made calls like this before, but it never got easier. Especially not when the child was sitting right there, looking at her with eyes full of terror and betrayal. Lily, she said gently, I need to make a very important phone call. The people I'm calling are good people whose job is to keep children safe. They're not going to hurt you or be mean to you. They're going to help us figure out how to make sure you're safe. Lily shook her head frantically, her dark hair whipping around her face. No, please. I don't want you to call them. I'll be good. I promise I'll be so good that Daddy won't get mad anymore. Mrs. Thompson's heart shattered at the desperation in Lily's voice. This child truly believed that she was responsible for her father's violence. She believed that if she could just be perfect enough, quiet enough, good enough, the abuse would stop. Sweetheart, Mrs. Thompson said softly, you are already good. You are the goodest little girl I know. This is not about you being good. This is about keeping you safe. Ms. Rodriguez dialed the number she had memorized years ago, but hoped she would never have to use. The number for Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services, this is Amanda speaking. How can I help you today? This is Sarah Rodriguez, school counselor at Roosevelt Elementary School. I need to report suspected child abuse. We have an 8-year-old girl who has disclosed physical abuse and is showing clear evidence of ongoing violence in the home. Lily's eyes grew wide with terror when she heard those words. She jumped from her chair so quickly that it nearly toppled over. "No!" she cried, her voice rising to a pitch that made both women wince. "You can't call them. Daddy will be so angry. He'll hurt me so much worse. You don't understand." Mrs. Thompson quickly moved to steady Lily, but the child backed away from her touch. She pressed herself against the wall, looking like a trapped animal. "Please," Lily sobbed, "please don't do this. I'll run away. I'll hide. I won't come to school anymore. Just please don't call those people." Ms. Rodriguez continued her conversation with the CPS worker while keeping one eye on Lily's emotional breakdown. "Yes, we have documented evidence through repetitive artwork that shows clear indicators of abuse. We also have physical evidence. Yes, visible bruising consistent with adult-inflicted injuries. No, the child is here with us now. Yes, we can keep her safe until someone arrives." When Ms. Rodriguez hung up the phone, Lily was curled up in the corner of the office, her knees pulled up to her chest, rocking slightly back and forth. "They're coming, aren't they?" Lily whispered. "They're coming to take me away. They're coming to help," Ms. Rodriguez corrected gently. "A very nice lady named Mrs. Patterson is going to come talk with us. She's helped lots of children who were in situations like yours. What's going to happen to me?" Lily asked, her voice so small it was barely audible. "First, Mrs. Patterson is going to make sure you're not hurt anywhere else," Ms. Rodriguez explained. "She might want to take you to see a doctor who will check to make sure you're okay. Then she'll figure out the safest place for you to stay tonight. Will I have to go back home?" Lily asked, and both women could hear the fear in her voice. "Not tonight," Ms. Rodriguez said. "Maybe not for a while. Not until we can make sure it's safe for you." Lily absorbed this information in silence. She was only 8 years old, but she was trying to process concepts that would challenge most adults. The idea that her father might be wrong. The idea that she didn't deserve to be hurt. The idea that there might be a life different from the one she had always known. 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on the office door. Ms. Rodriguez opened it to reveal a woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind blue eyes. She was dressed professionally, but carried herself with the warmth of someone who had dedicated her life to helping children. "Ms. Rodriguez? I'm Amanda Patterson from Child Protective Services." Mrs. Patterson entered the office and immediately focused on Lily, who was still huddled in the corner chair. The social worker's expression softened as she took in the sight of this frightened little girl. "Hello, Lily," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice gentle and non-threatening. "I'm Mrs. Patterson, but you can call me Amanda if you'd like. I'm here to help make sure you're safe and cared for." Lily looked up at her with eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the world. "Are you going to take me away from Daddy?" she asked. "I'm going to make sure you're safe," Mrs. Patterson replied honestly. "Sometimes that means children need to stay somewhere else for a while, just until we can figure out how to make their home safe again." Mrs. Patterson knelt down to Lily's level, being careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Lily, I know this is scary and confusing. I know you love your daddy, even though he's been hurting you. It's okay to love someone and still need to be safe from them." Lily considered this for a moment. "Will Daddy get in trouble?" "Your daddy might face some consequences for hurting you," Mrs. Patterson answered honestly. "But our main concern right now is making sure you're okay. Can you show me where you're hurt?" With trembling hands, Lily once again rolled up her sleeves and lifted her shirt to reveal the bruises that covered her small body. Mrs. Patterson examined each injury carefully, taking photographs with a specialized camera for documentation. "Lily, these injuries need to be looked at by a doctor to make sure nothing is seriously wrong. Would that be okay with you?" Lily nodded reluctantly. "Will it hurt?" "The doctor will be very gentle," Mrs. Patterson assured her. "She just wants to make sure you're going to be okay." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Lily suddenly grabbed Mrs. Thompson's hand. "My paintings," she said urgently, as if remembering something crucial. "Can I have my paintings? The ones at my house?" Mrs. Thompson's heart broke all over again. Even in her fear and confusion, Lily was worried about her artwork. The paintings that had been her only way of communicating her pain. The pictures that had ultimately saved her life, of course.